in Greene and Greene, we stretch all the way from 1807 to 1957. And it's a curious 150 years that's held within the lives of these individuals. And I placed them together at this particular junction of the lecture series to bring out and stress an aspect to American history which is very rarely observed and almost never emphasized and accentuated, except for the fact that it reoccurs again and again. And its first real appearance in American history was in the voice of Walt Whitman. By his voice, I mean poems, and what he wrote, and the intent, for what purposes he wrote. And succinctly put, it's this, that the European experience in the New World, when it was exact and when it was spiritually energetic, touched upon a junction of two currents that had been separated by at least 12,000 to 15,000 years of temporal history, but it formed a unity in the primordial past and was disguised by this epical time period that lapsed. And somehow, psychically, the Europeans who came to this country, in their spiritual visions, put their finger on the point of contact that had been lost. It had been lost to the world, lost to everyone, and was brought back out so that the missing parts of the unity were put back together. And so the European Americans became the kingpin, bringing back together two disparate halves of a tradition after a whole epochal period since the close of the last ice age, and made again a unity which we now inherit in this time and whose benefits we are soon to experience in our time, in this country. The tradition was that Asian and the American Indian was an unbroken tradition thousands of years ago. And it was only by great, enormous migrations and great, enormous span of time since that had happened that those traditions were seen as sundered and disparate and different and at opposite ends of the world, and had no content. But that was only an illusion of time and distance. It had absolutely nothing to do with the reality. And the fact that as the American spiritual tradition developed, and the capacity and intensity of the American sages deepened, the more they came in contact with the natural living context of this country, and the more they realized the liaison of the spirit with the American Indians, the more in harmony we appeared to be with the Asians. And as the American Indians rejuvenated the visionary purity of the European capacity now become American, the more it was seen to be in great affinity with the Asian spiritual classics. And of course, as that first began to make its appearance with the visions and the visionary poetics of Walt Whitman, the elements that first came up were those core root elements of the Asian tradition, which we have discussed in this lecture series at the beginning. Whitman, in his great ramblings around Pomona, Long Island, the Indian form of Long Island, he became almost the same kind of Upanishadic seer that we would have found in India about 2000 BC. And if you want to read the kind of efflorescence of imagery that Whitman's songs have, then we go back to the Rig Veda. We go back 4,000 years, and we find the same sorts of evidence, the same natural-based exstances, and the same beginnings and developments of ritual expression of a clear-sighted, visionary experience, which the core of is to form a civilization of teaching and passing it on to generations through the song cycles, through the ceremonial cycle. Well, contemporaneous with Whitman and this fantastic unconscious discovery of his, shall we say, was contemporary of his, Longfellow. Longfellow, totally different type of personality, but contemporaneous with Whitman. And in his own right, the most excellent sort of character, the fine style human-heartedness, which is always required in pure vision, was there in Longfellow. And so it was that even though he was an academic, and even though he came from a patrician family and loved to be in that position, Longfellow could not help but express in his works, and especially the one which I'll stress tonight, the Song of Hiawatha, the same kind of penetrating vision, only somewhat more unconscious, if we can use that term, than Whitman. Nevertheless, there. And it's interesting to note that just at the time when Longfellow's work was winnowing and garnering his visions and insights, the Greene and Greene should be born. And Charles Sumner Greene should be named after Longfellow's best friend, Charles Sumner. And that the Greene brothers would turn their Native American crafts vision into a worldly visionary source, bringing in the essence of East Asian tradition. And this time in an architectural form rather than into a song form, because the evolution of spirit in Asia had moved from the Rig-Vedic songs and the Upanishadic philosophic visions down through the millennium into the expression of Japanese architecture, one of its ultimate expressive forms. And so it is that between Whitman and Longfellow and Greene and Greene and others who we will see in this series, we have this great parenthesis in the last 150 years of American history, wherein the more we find our own traditions, the land that we actually live within, the native peoples who actually energized that land and took their livelihood from the imagery that was there, the more we come in harmony with their vision, the more we find ourselves in sync with the Asian Christians. And the more the world, East and West, comes together and forms a kind of the unity, which had not been seen in the world for at least the last 12 to 15,000 years. Where in that geography and in that time does that seem, that interpenetration, that interspacing come? Well, it comes in Southern California in the late 20th century. In our time and our story. So, in order to flesh this out, not just the idea of literary, not just the notion of it, philosophically, but the fullness of it as a living experience to which we are treasured heirs. We must go back to Longfellow and begin there, because with Whitman, the trumpet blast is a little flamboyant, a little loud, and we are overcome by his genius. But with Longfellow, a somewhat lesser voice, yet no less important, because in his quiet life, in his steady refrain, we can find the root key that we can follow with our minds and our nature and our sense of spiritual development, and trace it up to our own time, where this little root seed is no longer unconscious, but has blossomed into a flower of peculiar, particular character for our people and our time. But we have to go back to the beginning. Longfellow was born in the state of Maine in 1807. He lived most of his early life there around Portland on the coast. He was born into a fairly wealthy family. He was sent to the Portland Academy as a youngster. He was very pretentious in his writing capacity and style. He was sent finally to the new Bowdoin College, and he precociously brought out as a teenager a volume of translations from Latin in particular, which so impressed the people at Bowdoin College that they decided off the cuff and immediately to make this very, very young man professor of modern languages. Fantastic surprise, and rather not the way our universities do things. You haven't spent 10 years in that home. So Longfellow was sent off to Europe to learn his craft, his trade, languages. And he spent 3 years in Europe. And he learned progressively as he traveled through the countries and stayed in a while. He learned French, Spanish, Italian, and later on German, and of course Latin, and Greek, and Swedish, Danish, and Dutch, Portuguese, English. So when Longfellow came back, even though he was 22 years old, he was easily the greatest scholar in the United States. And he rolled him over. And they couldn't handle his fantastic capacity, and the only place in the United States that could handle it, and they were glad to get it, was Harvard. And Harvard sent it for him. And so Longfellow became a distinguished professor of modern languages at Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And with him, he took this fantastic sense of having a mind which was expressively clear in more than a dozen languages. This does something. Who can make sense out of his feelings, out of his experiences, in a dozen different ways. It produces, in a rather mechanical sense, but nevertheless, the sense of kaleidoscopic vision, which the sage seer like Whitman would have had on his job. So that Longfellow got it in rather academic mode, but got it nonetheless. This capacity, as a writer once told me, to see things in 6 dimensions at once, and to always have to be picking and choosing what he's going to emphasize in his conception and perception, in order to just make some token path which he could live. As Longfellow developed things, more and more, he realized that the language books which he was writing, histories of the French language, study guides to Spanish and so forth, translations from the German, all these various things. A lot of academic papers and books and articles, and of course syllabuses and everything. But it wasn't satisfactory to them as a man, as a human being, as someone to whom his kaleidoscopic capacity had been opened up. So he turned more and more to poetry, because it's in poesis, the making of reality through language. It's through poesis that we find a satisfaction in the sense that it resolves in modes of expression disparate ribbons of insight that otherwise would entangle you up hopelessly in your life. You have to have someone to tie these things up. And so he began to write books of poetry. And surprisingly enough to him, they began to sell. Longfellow is one of the few American poets who's ever had a wide commercial audience. I totaled up the statistics. By 1857, he had sold more than 30 million books in this country, which is outrageous. Hiawatha alone sold 50,000 copies in its first year. It's a hardcover book in 1855. It's unheard of. Someone once observed that probably every household in the country had a Bible and Evangeline. So that Longfellow began to observe in his own capacity this fantastic talent that he had somehow touched, perhaps in a popular way, yes, but nevertheless had touched some secret core of the American intelligence and consciousness, although they wouldn't use that term then. Sensibility, they would use that term. He had touched something which reverberated in almost every family that cared to read him. And sure enough, life had a few cramps for this blessed existence. He married twice. His first wife died after 4 years of a childbirth fever. They were in Europe on a trip, and she died in Rotterdam. And it took 6 or 7 years for Longfellow to be able to make his way out of this. And secondly, he married the prettiest, wealthiest girl in town. And her name was Frances Applegate. And for wedding present, they were bought this enormous 3-story house in Cambridge, which Longfellow had been admiring. He was a young man living in an apartment with a professor's salary. And eventually they were given cottages here and there. So, tremendous, happy life. The second wife died in a fire after about 20 years of marriage. And it was in that fire, simply, that Longfellow's face was scarred trying to save his second wife, and that's why he grew this enormous beard. And also in photographs, Longfellow was a distinguished looking, rather athletically sculpted young man, up until about 1860, with just the mutton chops coming out. And after his second wife died in 1861, he began growing the beard. Just in 3 years, he became a white-haired, white-bearded poet, a man whose face was familiar and synonymous with poet in the 19th century. For instance, when Longfellow died in 1882, he had a special niche set aside for him in Westminster Abbey because of the high regard that he was held. He had been a lifelong friend of Charles Dickens and other writers and so forth. But Longfellow was, if we may use this term, archetypally the poet in the 19th century for America. If you thought of poet, you thought of poet. Because he touched a root and a chord, which although most people could never express, probably would have been surprised to learn what vistas had actually opened up to 100 years later. But people are not Jewish, nor are they. They have an innate sense of value and manage to preserve, as we have seen time and time again, those elements of experience which really are essential to survival and excellence. The people will preserve those. And so this tremendous popular response to Longfellow was actually, we can see in hindsight, a tremendous recognition that there where he placed his writing pen was a point of resolution for a whole experience pattern, without which, having the vision of Longfellow or Whitman or the later developments, American history would become an enigma. Two counterpolar spirals, the one forming the background to the other, radiating in opposite directions, and we would be lost forever trying to trace what is the real form, what is the background, wherever we go. Those without a vision in this country very, very quickly perish into infinite innuendo because of the nature of our background and our history, because of the key that's required to open it up. Without the key, it's the biggest mask we've ever seen. With the key, it's the best bow ever shot. It's just that sort of thing. And incidentally, Frank Lloyd Wright, I'm sorry we don't have in this series, but I promise you, in the next series, was sort of the ultimate seer, seeing this penetration of the American background and the Asian connection and the future American expression. And of course, the folded hands coming together, later replaced by the red square, the vision again. Out of all of Longfellow's works, I chose the Song of Hiawatha because it's perhaps the most familiar, but it's the one easiest to get a hitch on to looking at the development that we will trace. He used several sources. One of them we have here in our library, The Myth of Hiawatha and Other Oral Legends of the American Indians, North American Indians, by Henry Schoolcraft. It's simply called the Hiawatha Legends. We have it here in our library down below. If you remember, Schoolcraft is the one who did that huge 6-volume series on the American Indians that we started with course. And so we come back to Schoolcraft. We come back to American Indians. We've been going all this time with the development. And this is part of the nature of the United States. We are not supposed to get away from the essentials. We're supposed to come back to them again and again and work them in, because we were given treasures and they're not incidents, and they have to be worked in. So the form repeats itself in this lecture series. Thank you. The Song of Hiawatha begins with an introduction. And in the introduction, he asks, where do these songs come from? And he writes it this way: should you ask me, whence these stories? Whence these legends and traditions? With the odors of the forest, with the dew and damp of meadows, etc. I should answer, I should tell you, from the forests, from the prairies, from the great lakes of the Northland, from the land of the Ojibways, from the land of the Dakotas. In other words, it comes from the natural horizon of experience, the mountains, the prairies, and the people who have always expressively been here, as long as we can tell. Now, there have been modern literary critics who, in their academic offices, write on the poets like Longfellow, say, well, he seemed to confuse several different legends. Well, I suppose that he did bring several different legends together, and it's all right. It doesn't matter. We're not engineers building a bridge. We don't all have to have steel girders all the way through. We can build it in a different way. He chose as a basic set, the Lake Superior area, and he called it the Big Sea Water. And he chose this area because in his time, when he was writing this, the 1850s, it was still pretty weak. The interface between the civilized portions of this country and the northern wilderness stretching indefinitely on. So that Lake Superior on one side, on the Wisconsin-Michigan side, had just recently been settled. And on the Minnesota-Canadian side, it was just being crowed. So that it was the area at the time that was on the line between civilization and wilderness. So we used it as a setting. Even though Hiawatha, in terms of historical development, had lived probably in the upper New York State, over near the Iroquois League area. Yes, he transposed Hiawatha. He transposed them out of the tribes, out of the area, out of the time. But because of the exigencies of his vision and of the need for the symbolic time of this golden mean that we've been talking about, so it had to be at Lake Superior. And the stories come from the background there and the peoples there. And after the introduction, saying, where are these visions, these songs seem to have an origin in nature and in the people, then the Song of Hiawatha proper begins. And the very first beginning of it is the peace pipe, the Kelly, so that it begins with that symbol of unity between man and the divine, between man as the quote civilized and the divine as the wilderness yet to be explored, so that the Lake Superior becomes transposed into the Kelly, into the peace pipe, and he begins the poem with that, and how the peace pipe was made. And the peace pipe was made by the Great Spirit himself from a red rock quarry. And in fact, it was such a ethical experience for humankind, for the Indians, for our forebears, that Longfellow says that all the various tribes were sent for, so that representatives were brought together, and many weeks and moons passed, so that all these various representatives from all the different tribes could come together. And then the Great Spirit gave them the directions of how to break away this red clay and take the reed stems, grow, place them together, and take this new development, tobacco, and prepare it, and tap the pipe, and how to smoke it with the turning to the 6 directions, north, south, east, west, heavenward and earthward, and to share in this. And that once having gone through that ceremony together, they then would understand the necessity for bearing their weapons. And so the whole first part of the Song of Hiawatha is a poetic expression of how in some time past, for people now becoming extinct, they learned primary lesson of how to get along with each other so that they could, in their collectivity, form a interface with the divine. Because that was the purpose of man and of creation all along. And without this gathering together of the tribes and this exploring of divinity together, man has no purpose, has no nature worth the sake. So that Hiawatha's song begins with that. Then the second part is just entitled The Four Winds, 4 different winds. And the major mythological force personified in this passage is Mudjekeewis. Mudjekeewis becomes the arbiter of the winds, and save the west wind for himself. And Mujikiwas thereby becomes the shaping force on the earth. The winds control the temperature, the winds control the seasons, they control the cycles of life. So that Mujikiwas becomes the mythological personage who has the reins of power in his hand. And he is said then to enter into the picture in this way. And by the third part, we finally get to Hiawatha's childhood, and Longfellow writes it this way. Downward through the evening twilight, in the days that are forgotten, in the unremembered ages, from the full moon fell Nokomis, fell the beautiful Nokomis, she a wife, but not a mother. She was sporting with her women, swinging in a swing of grapevines, when her rival, though rejected, full of jealousy and hatred, cut the leafy swing asunder, cut in twain the twisted grapevines, and Nokomis fell affrighted, downward through the evening twilight, on the muscovy the meadow, on the prairie full of blossoms. See, a star falls, said the people. From the sky, a star is falling. Now Nokomis becomes the earth, the universal mother, the mother of mankind. She really is that image, and she is a full moon. She is the earth fructified in the full moon phase, able to bring fruition. She has a daughter named Winona, and it is Winona who is the mother of Hiawatha. And she is the mother of Hiawatha through the interference of Mujikiwas in human nature. He comes and impregnates Winona by God's craft, and then she goes on. And Winona dies in childhood, and little Hiawatha is born, so that he is raised by his grandmother. And the American Indian tradition is the grandparent generation that can give us spiritual instruction. You don't go to your parents to learn about the spirit. You go to your grandparents. The grandfathers, they are home. The grandparents, they are home. Because they do not have the immediate physical time, the parental time. They're not concerned just with your nourishment in terms of food, education, clothing. They're concerned with you as children of children. And they have that distance, that interval in expression in terms of wave modulation that is needed for being concerned with the larger things, the larger patterns. So as to the grandmother. And Nokomis raises Hiawatha. He is raised by grandmother. And he has this kind of an education. And this is beautiful, the way that Longfellow expresses it. Sang the song Nokomis taught him. Wa chase a little firefly, little flitting white fire insect, little dancing white fire creature, light me with your little candle, ere upon my bed I illuminate you, ere asleep I close my eyelids. And then saw the moon rise from the water, rippling round from the water, saw the flecks and shadows on it, whispered, what is that, Nokomis? And the good Nokomis answered, what's a warrior very angry? And she goes on and tells him that. So we see the moon. And the next image that he sees is a rainbow. You see the moon, a rainbow, and an owl. Three final images. A rainbow for beginnings of fruition, a moon for beginnings of fruition, a rainbow for the bridge covenant sign, and an owl for the wisdom incarnate symbol. The full moon, a rainbow, remember in Genesis, the rainbow was set in as a guarantee of covenant. That this destruction will not happen with bridging happen. So it's a full moon, a rainbow, and an owl. And each time he asks in a whisper, what is that, Nokomis? And she telling him does not give definitions. She gives the story patterns behind, so that the more that he asks, the more glimpses into patterns he has, so that his wisdom grows not like a dictionary, but as a world. So that as he matures, he's been given all the time to questions that he asks in wisdom, the fullest expressive answers you could ask for, the arcs of the great wheel of existence that begins to fill in, so that at maturity, a moment of vision comes that he understands how all of it moves together. And this is Hiawatha. This is his visionary capacity. And when he is grown, the sign that he is grown is that he is able to go out and provide meat for the table, kill a deer, not to kill, but to bring home food for the table, nourishment. And Longfellow even writes that the deer seemed to leap to find the arrow, showing it wasn't a killing, but it was a meeting. And it was a sign of time involved for the maturation of Hiawatha. What does a spiritual being do the first time the vision is clear? He makes a pilgrimage to his origins, to clear up the relational element. And so Hiawatha goes to find his father. And who is his father? His father is Muchakiwas, the west wind. And where does he live? Well, it must be somewhere in the west. So Hiawatha journeys. And where does he journey? He journeys across the United States, just like our historic development. He goes all the way to the Rockies and beyond, and there he finds the home of the west wind. And as Longfellow poetically says, it's at the edge of everything, just before, not that it falls off for nothingness, the edge of the pond. And there he finds Muchakiwas. And when he finds him, his father recognizes him because he sees in him the beauty of his mother, not so much in the face of facial features, but in the capacity that he is descended through his mother from Nokomis, who, like a star, fell from heaven and became primordial earth, in a way a meteorite falls and becomes like the iron that becomes the tool that allows for civilization to develop. And he sees that aspect present in Hiawatha. Now, Muchakiwas is immortal. He is a natural function. He is a mythological being. He is, in the spiritual vision, one of the structural elements of reality. Longfellow has Hiawatha coming with a thought of vengeance in his mind, that he will equalize destiny by trying to kill Muchakiwas, because it wasn't he that killed his mother. But that's a snag in Hiawatha's own vision that needs to be cleared up. And so Muchakiwas, like the right father, a spiritual element that is necessary, instructing this major protagonist in the last little part of his wheel of vision. He has to see himself as a part of that wheel pattern and not as separate from it. So he has to fit into it so that he is one with the wheel. And so Muchakiwas begins to have a wrestling match with Hiawatha. And this wrestling is like Jacob wrestling with an angel. It's a spiritual wrestling. And 4 times Hiawatha goes through this wrestling. And we'll see later that he goes through a wrestling match again 4 times later on in his life and his career. Finally, Muchakiwas says, "Hold, at length," cried Muchakiwas, "hold my son, my Hiawatha. 'Tis impossible to kill me, for you cannot kill the immortal. I have put you to this trial, but to know and prove your courage, now receive the prize of valor. Go back home to your people, live among them, toil among them, cleanse the earth from all that harms it, clear the fishing grounds and rivers, slay all monsters and magicians, all the wendigos, the giants, all the serpents, the Kenebeks, as I slew the Mission Mokra, slew the great bear of the mountains. And at last, when death draws near you, when the awful eyes of Papa glare upon you in the darkness, I will share my kingdom with you. Ruler shall you be thenceforward of the northwest wind, so that he will transform and join the natural forces at his transformation. When he is coming back from this, when he is still caught up, still shocked enough to discover that he too belongs in the pattern, that the great wheel of existence has a spoke with his name on it, and that is where he belongs. Still in that state, he runs across, in his traveling back, the woman that he is to meet and share his life with many hot, lacking water. And as he is coming back, there in the Dakota, there the ancient arrow maker, and you remember arrows, some of you were here for those shamanistic lectures. The arrow is that great element of transformation. It's not just that instrument that we shoot with a bow, but is the symbol of the power of transformation itself. Later on becomes the Vajra in the Tibetan Buddhist. So the arrow. This is the ancient arrow maker. He's the father of laughing water. And laughing water is a compliment to Hiawatha. There the ancient arrow maker made his arrowheads of sandstone, arrowheads of chalcedony, arrowheads of flinted jasper, smooth and sharpened at the edges, hard and polished, keen and costly. The primordial tool is the arrowhead. He's the maker. With him dwelt his dark-eyed daughter, wayward as the Minnehaha with the moods of shade and sunshine. She has the door, like a touch. Eyes that smiled and frowned alternately, fleet as rapid as the river, tresses flowing like the water, and his musical alacrity. And he named her from the river, from the waterfall, he named her, Minnehaha, like the water. And so this image is given to him. This is also a reward of valor for him, the image of his compliment, because now that he belongs in the great wheel of truth and its turning, he now has earned the right to have a compliment, a mate. He has earned the right to the mystic marriage. When he comes back, Hiawatha, trying not to get involved personally, trying not to lose this universal rhythm which he has gotten from his father, leaves Minnehaha with her father and comes back to finish up his ritual, which is always for the American Indian to have a dream. Any spiritual undertaking must issue in a dream vision. And so Hiawatha comes back, he commences his fasting, and he's going to run a 7-day fast. And in the 7-day fast, the dream image finally comes to him. He's asleep in his hut, and it's near sunset. And through this arch in his hut, from the abyss of dream universe, and he saw a youth approaching, dressed in garments green and yellow, coming through the purple twilight. Plumes of green bent o'er his forehead, and his hair was soft and golden, standing at the open doorway. Long he looked at Hiawatha, looked with pity and compassion on his wasted form and features, And in accents like the sign of the south wind in the treetops, said he, "O my Hiawatha, all your prayers will be heaven." And so this Greene visitor comes, and he says to him, "Tomorrow is the last day of your conflict. It is the last day of your fasting. You will conquer and overcome me. Make a bed for me to lie in, where the rain may fall upon me, where the sun may come and warm me. Strip these garments, green and yellow. Strip this nodding plumage from me. Lay me in the earth and make it soft and loose and light above me. Let no panic disturb my slumber. Let no weed nor worm molest me. Let not Progody, the raven, come to haunt and molest me. Only come yourself to watch me, till I wake and start and quick, till I leap into the sunshine." And so Hiawatha is told that he must kill and dismember and strip and bury this green figure. Very good, but he does. And so he brings it. Day by day did Hiawatha go to wait and watch beside it, kept the dark mold soft above it, kept it clean from weeds and insects, drove away with scoffs and shouting, Progody, the king of ravens, till at length the green feather from the earth shot slowly upward, then another and another. And before the summer ended stood the maize in all its beauty. Corn, stalks of corn, with its shining robes about it, and its long, soft yellow tresses, the tassel. And in rapture, Hiawatha cried aloud, "It is mountain men." His dream, vision, person comes back each time, so that the maize, the corn, the root of nourishment in the world, is given in the vision to Hiawatha. And then, when he has this vision and is able to convey it to his brethren, then Hiawatha may be married. So we have adventures of Hiawatha, and then we have his wooing. As unto the bow the cord is, so unto the man is woman. Though she bends him, she obeys him. Though she draws him, yet she follows. Useless each without the other. Thus the youthful Hiawatha said within himself and pondered, much perplexed by various feelings, listless, longing, hoping, fearing, dreaming still in the haha of the lovely laughing water in the land of the Dakotas. And so he inquires of old Nokomis. They are brought together and they have a wedding feast. And at this mystic marriage, and because we're dealing with universe elements brought together, this is an occasion then, at this juncture, where all these books are being come together, for a hub of understanding to be generated. And so, Longfellow, beautiful in his way, gives us then, at this hub of being, 3 different events. The first one is a dance done by a character named Papu Kiwis. And Papu Kiwis is a mystic character. And you shall hear how Papu Kiwis, how the handsome Yenadizzi, danced at Hiawatha's wedding. So he dances. He dances the dance of life. He is really a Shiva incarnate. And then the second is how the gentle Chia Abos, he the sweetest of musicians, sings his songs of love and longing. So this character, Chia Abos, who is the master singer, who is able to put into songs the great traditions. Songs that are short enough that one may understand and remember them and not of them. But songs that mystically can unfold in all the necessary expressive meanings that we would require to understand it. So we have a mystic dancer who can create or destruct. We have a seer who can sing in song. And third, an old friend of Nokomis named Iago, I-A-G-O-O, who's the great boaster and the marvelous storyteller, told his tales of strange adventure, that the feast might be more joyous, that the time might pass more gaily, and the guests be more contented. Sumptuous was the feast Nokomis made at Hiawatha's wedding. But the stories are the myths, and they're the large patterns of meanings that Iago tells. They're the morality stories in large. So we have this Papakivas who dances his mystic dances. We have the wonderful little songs that Chibiabas sing, and we'll see a little later how some of those songs were translated. I have some slides, because the picture of our wedding of the Algonquin Indians were exactly those songs that were kept and were not understood until the Smithsonian Institute sponsored a few people who actually don't understand what all these curious treasures were that we have in the museum. They went to White Earth, Minnesota, and lo and behold, people who understood what these were, because they had some of their own. You have to go and find someone who still remembers and living, and you find out what it's good. So Iago tells a myth, a story, the son of the evening star. And we haven't time to go into it, but I think for those who have come to the summer solstice program here every year, the evening star is a formative mythological figure in all the North American and South American heathen traditions. And of course, the son of the evening star fits in with the Sundance material. It fits in also with the medieval material. All the great mystical ceremonies in the Americas feature the evening star. The mind is the same. After the wedding comes a section called Blessing the Cornfields, because it was the deliverance of corn through the vision, the nourishment to the people, that permitted the hierogods, the mystic marriage to happen. And then after, of course, remembering what we're all about, one goes to bless the thing itself. That's the wonderful thing in Midsummer Night's Dream. After all the marriages are brought together, the fairy spirits of nature and the world come in and bless the houses, bless the castle, because those were the cornfields. Then, after that is done, we reach a plateau where Longfellow was able, at long last, to bring out a spiritual treasure. And that is what I just alluded to, picture writing, and how Hiawatha delivered the elements of symbolic writing, picture writing, hieroglyphic meaning to the people, and taught them all the uses of it. Thus it was that Hiawatha, in his wisdom, taught the people all the mysteries of painting, all the art of picture writing, on the smooth bark of the birch tree, on the white skin of the reindeer, on the grave post of the village. Then follow several other sections, and among them is one where Papakivas, the mystic dancer, who has wound up one way, now must unwind. And this unwinding is destroyed. And he comes in, and Papakivas, what is that mythic image of the unwinding of the creative force, that destructive force? He brings in and gains a chance to lead people astray. What better image? Remember, Melville made the confidence man, the devil in his time as a Mississippi riverboat gambler, who loved to raise consternation and get people anxious over pain, losing, and all that. You shall hear how Papakivas, he the handsome Yenidazi, whom the people call the storm fool, vexed the village with disturbance. You shall hear of all his mischief, and his flight from Hiawatha, and his wondrous transmigrations at the end of his adventures. Now, Papakivas, being a destructive Shiva-like form may transform. Or if you wish a different metaphoric case, like in Homer, Orcus, the old man of the sea, whom Odysseus grabs and transforms into many different shapes. But Odysseus did not let go, and Hiawatha does not let go. The heroes do not let go. They understand the motion and form, and they are there to resolve the energy, not to be baffled by its illusory manifestations. And so Harku shouted Papakiwis as he entered at the doorway, I am tired of this talking, tired of old Iago's stories, tired of Hiawatha's wisdom. Here is something to amuse you, better than this endless talking. Then from out his pouch of wolfskins, forth he drew with solemn manner all the games of bowl and counters, compassing with 13 pieces, white on one side they were painted, and vermilion on the other. 2 Kinebecks of great serpents, 2 Inatweg or Richmond, 1 great war club. And he goes on with all the elements of this game and series of games of gambling. Thus he taught the game of hazard, thus displayed it and explained it, running through its various chances, various changes, various meanings. 20 curious eyes stared at him, full of eagerness stared at him. Many games, said Obiake, many games of skill and hazard. And so, of course, is this notion that the best way to unwind an integrated tradition is to bleed off its energies and perceptions with games of chance and meander. That's the easiest way to unravel the civilization. It's we know it probably doesn't people with everything. So, Papakiwis then turns the whole place upside down. Hiawatha goes after him. Papakiwis is able to change and transform, but Hiawatha takes care of him. And ended were all his tricks and gamblings, ended all his craft and cunning, ended all his mischief making, all his gambling and his dancing, all his wooing of maidens. Then the noble Hiawatha took his soul, his ghost, his shadow, spake and said, O Papakiwis, never more in human form shall you search for new adventures. Never more with jest and laughter dance the dust and leaves and whirlwinds. But above there in heaven you shall soar and sail and circle. I will change you to an eagle, to King, the great war eagle, chief of all the fowls with feathers, chief of Hiawatha's chickens. So the wise, sage being doesn't exclude from the wheel of law any element, but transforms it and works it in so that it becomes part of the pattern. It's the integration form that is the test, and not the continuing seeking or exorcising an undesirable element, which is always the lure that leads into a new complication. Karma ends when the wheel is ended, when the Dharma chakra world is complete. Karma always concerned, no matter what the reason, for thinking this is not going to keep it. This should not be. It all is, and is should roll in one motion. Then, after this, Longfellow brings the end of the song of Hiawatha by a vision of the coming of the white man. And when he sees in his vision that the white man is coming, then he gravely spake and answered to the jeering and their jesting, True is all the Iago tells us. I have seen it in a vision, seen the great canoe with pinions, seen the people with white faces, seen the coming of this bearded people of the wooden vessel, from the regions of the morning, from the shining land of water. Gishimanitu, the mighty, the great spirit that created, sends them hither on his errand. They're coming, not for their greed, not to take our lands. They are on an errand also in this great existence, coming under the direction of the Great Spirit. And therefore, Hiawatha departs westward and sets up, as Longfellow sees in his vision, a cycle that the pioneers will follow. And in the following, will at some time in the future realize that they went the same way. They overlaid the experience of the red man, and that there was a mystic intertwined purpose of the Great Spirit in this adventure. So Hiawatha's departure, and Longfellow styles it in this one, two excerpts. By the shores of Gitchagumi, by the shining big sea water, at the doorway of his wigwam, in the pleasant summer morning, Hiawatha stood and waited. All the air was full of freshness, all the earth was bright and joyous. And before him, to the sunshine, westward toward the neighboring forest, past in golden swarm the almond, past the bees, the honeymakers, burning, singing in the sunshine. Right above him shone the heavens, level spread the lake before him. From its bosom leaped the sturgeon, sparkling, flashing in the sunshine. On its margin, the great forest stood reflected in the water. Every treetop had its shadow, motionless beneath the water. In other words, a vision of the unity of nature, its polarities unified. And was with that vision, that spiritual perception that Hiawatha leads to move westward. Nothing big, nothing fragmented, nothing about a conflict, but a vision of wholeness in nature. And he begins to set in, through his yoke, a pioneer path that the red man will take, and later the white man will take over him, so that there is a double helix of motion through American history, which Hiawatha will initiate by his guild. And of course, it is self-development that he stands in, and it takes him. I am going, O my people, on a long and distant journey. Many moons and many weathers will have come and will have vanished, ere I come again to see you. But my guests I leave behind me. Listen to their words of wisdom. Listen to the truth they tell you. For the Master of Light has sent them from the land and light of light and morning. On the shores stood Hiawatha, turned and waved his hand at parting. On the clear and luminous water, he launched his birch canoe for sailing. From the pebbles of the margin, shoved it forth into the water, whispered to it, westward, westward. And his speech starts flowing. Time. Time is a thief. I don't know how I can get to Greene and Greene. I'll get to Greene. Longfellow's four friends got together and founded and made a club. And one of the people was Charles Sumner Greene. Let's see what Charles Sumner, for whom Charles Sumner Greene was named. Sumner was a wonderful musician. He was in Congress for about 25 years. So it's, he was in Congress from 1851 to 1874 when he got a third thing. He was the chairman of foreign relations from 1851 to 1861. So that he was very high up in Congress. He was very close associate congressional of Lincoln, the Republican. Yes, with his Longfellow. They all believed in the necessity of abolishing slavery, the necessity of putting the country back in the moral train. And Charles Sumner Greene was born in 1868. So he was 14 when Longfellow was young. His brother Henry was born a few years later. He was only due to tremendous metabolic health, and both of them lived to 1950. Henry died in Albany in 1954. And Charles died in Carmel in 1957. They did most of their work, though, creative work, before the First World War.
built very little after the First World War. And we're recognized by the American Institute of Architects until they had a big celebration for them in 1952. They woke up to the fact that they had built some exploded. Most of it is private residences. Because the house, the home, is a very, very potent symbol for human beings, for mankind, particularly for Americans. The home is a very potent symbol. It has encoded in all of its possibilities everything that we really do treasure and really do need to know. And so it is always a revelation to find architects instead of designers, artists instead of construction engineers, and a home. And in the case of Greene and Greene, in one particular instance, it can home perfect. And we can see it anytime we wish. And speaking of the Gamma House, we're in Pasadena, which is about as mystical an expression of the hidden spirit as you ever want to find. Apart from if you want to go to the Gamma House. It has an unerring capacity for sensitive to elicit from qualities which, when you get acquainted again here, can only be turned to yourself. And it was put not in some arcane cipher document to be buried, but was raised up in sunlight and natural materials to be lived in day after day. And through the great graces and energies that move in our region, it has been preserved almost perfectly, then put into the context of the great villages so that it will be preserved. And we can go and experience it over and over again. The basic motif that occurs in the Gamma House is a motif of this cloud symbol. And you can play with the cloud symbol and go back through vibration, through lightning, through images of man, through images of cloud, naturally cumulus cloud, from where that symbol or artistic motif may have come from, a visionary sense. But this form is used over and over and over in various elements in the system, so that the entire house, in terms of its composition, creates the vibration of cloud-formed motion. And if you've been in there a dozen times, you can come out of that door and not feel like you're walking behind a discovery. And you have to go and get yourself in. It's an incredible experience because they designed every aspect of the house. They made the carpets, the rugs, they made the furniture. They made everything that you see and don't see. So that the entirety of the structure began with went up to Europe for a year. And they left a mountain and $50,000 to build this thing. And so Greene and Greene got busy with their telegrams and they sent for all the master crafts in Europe. And they brought Tiffany glass experts and brought carpenters that knew how to work with the woods of the world, masons. They brought the whole crew together and they sat down for a year or so and they built. And it was an enormous 8,000 square foot home. And it's 12 rooms just open amply into the invisible realm of right proportion. And the gold beam and the cloud symbol are just everywhere in a natural form. And we'll see some thought in that time. It is the counterpart of this expression of the reverence of man, of nature. There's an open book of mystic picture because through learning how to write the natural symbol in architecture, Greene and Greene made a true visionary home, which we can occupy. And it is peculiarly an American expression. You won't find it in Japan, and you won't find it here, but you find it here. It's odd because it brings together like harmonious elements from disparate groups that had once been primarily limited before the last message, and now they're brought back together in a new life and gives it that unmistakable flavor of verity. And we'll see some parts of that tonight. The mystic picture writing, the making of spiritual songs in a limited array of symbols, is an art which is beginning to become attuned to again. So, John and I have made some slides of some of these from Smithsonian Institute publication on the Grand Medicine Lodge, the Medweaver of Ojibwa. We have some slides, and I'm afraid we have so many slides today, and so many are piled up in brief. Forgive me if I just show them to you and not enlarge too much. We will come back to these poems. The mystic song we'll bring back next week, because when we talk about William James, who comes out of Harvard, same place, born and grown up there about the same time, we begin to see that these links of great visionaries in this country seem to touch side by side, and we seem to find that there is this great chain of being operating within American history, all of this world, perfect love. And with James, when we talk about the varieties of religious experiences, great classic, we'll have to come back and we'll use some of these old Algonquin Indian songs to show basic patterns which reoccur in religious vision. And James, of course, the great synthesizer on the psychological and intellectual level. For those that don't know, Carl used to read William James all the time. So well, let's look at some of them and see them. I hope this is going to work. This is a slide of Lincoln first. This was one of the few smiling Lincolns ever been discovered. Alice, our librarian here, found a cache of engraved images of presidents and writers. And what we all wanted was a smiling, as smiling as he got. Yeah. I forget who it was, but somebody once said that future tyrants are going to have a terrible time trying to use American history and Europe to justify their tyrannies, because when you look back and you see what they represented, you can see it for your own self. It represented dignity, maturity, and integration. And there's no way to get around it. Rail splitter sounds pretty strict. Longfellow, 1865, 1870, around there. He would be 60 years old or so. After most of his publications, I'm going to rush along. There's so many things attempted to be said. These are faces of the Ojibwa Indians in Longfellow's time. These were painted in the 1880s, and they pretty well represent the kind of individuals that we would be dealing with. The song title. Bark carriers Thunderbird and Buffalo, abstractly. The ends are frayed and curved in so as to hold the contents and to be carried like a baton in hand. Here's some other art materials to write things. The elements of the Menehulan ceremony are the recipe for all transformative magic. The drum, the rattle, the tobacco for making inhalation visible, the songs, the movements, and the mysteries. Here's a rattle, looking very much like that bird. Very first. When the Cardiff Lamas visited the Hopi Indians, they did it right on. The Lamas showed up, and the Hopis asked for rain, and the Lamas did a rain dance, which they could understand. And rain. It happened a few years ago. Similar tradition, similar wedges of insight. In the Grand Medicine Lodge are hosts, and the hosts, universally true, often resemble crosses. More often, they were about 7 feet high, often painted red with a green stripe across the top, and a stuffed owl would be posted on top of the structure. And these would be placed in a lodge, the dimensions of which would be roughly 80 feet by 20. And the walls and the roof, of course, would be just the wadded thatched saplings worked in. This kind of construct. In the foreground is a flattened stone, more than a foot in diameter, basically, as a focus for certain ceremonial happenings. The post at the far end, this would be the first degree, there are 4 degrees to the Hermetic American. And then a blanket in the center for the donations by the initiate of offerings, tobacco for the priests, and various other elements. The east and the west walls would have apertures that would open out. And it was like double doors being flung open and kept open so that the walls would form little short corridors at either end. Off on the east end, about 100 paces away, would be built the sweat lodge. And at the beginning of the ceremony of initiation would be 4 days successively in the sweat lodge. And then the initiate on the 5th day would be brought into the ceremony. For whatever degree he was receiving. This is from later on, 4th degree, the 4th post. You can see the red with the lodge very clearly. One aspect in the ceremony, which is outstanding, is the what they call the shooting of the megas. The megas is a mystic symbol, usually thought to be a shell, very much like a small white shell, rather curved and rounded, having a vesica type outline, and it would be symbolically shot into the breast of the initiate. This would be, there are the first degree, Menehulan, 4 knitted priests, and each one would take a medicine pouch, which had been made to move on the ground by his telepathic power, telekinetic power beforehand, to show that he did, in fact, have the power charged in him. I am tired of this talking. Tired of old Iago stories, tired of Hiawatha's wisdom. Here is something to amuse you, better than this endless talking. Then from out his pouch of wolfskin, forth he drew with solemn manner all the games of bowl and counters, compassing with 13 pieces, white on one side, they were painted, and vermilion on the other. 2 Kenebecks or great serpents, 2 Innitrag or witchen, 1 great war club. And he goes on with all the elements of this game and series of games of gambling. Thus he taught the game of hazard, thus displayed it and explained it, running through its various chances, various changes, various meanings. 20 curious eyes stared at him, full of eagerness stared at him. Many games, said Obiake, many games of skill and hazard. And so, of course, it's this notion that the best way to unwind an integrated tradition is to bleed off its energies and perceptions with games of chance and meander. That's the easiest way to unravel a civilization. It's we know it probably better than people would ever. So, Papa Kiwish then turns the whole place upside down. Hiawassee goes back with him. Papa Kiwish is able to change and transform, but Hiawassee takes care of him. And ended were all his tricks and gamblings, ended all his craft and cunning, ended all his mischief making, all his gambling and his dancing, all his wooing of the maidens. Then the noble Hiawatha took his soul, his ghost, his shadow, spake and said, O Papa Kiwish, never more in human form shall you search for new adventures. Never more with jest and laughter dance the dust in leaves and whirlwinds. But above there in heaven you shall soar and sail and circle. I will change you to an eagle, to King, the great war eagle, chief of all the fowls with feathers, chief of Hiawatha's chickens. So the wise, sage being doesn't exclude from the wheel of law any element, but transforms it and works it in so that it becomes part of the pattern. It's the integration form that is the test, and not the continuing seeking or exorcising an undesirable element, which is always the lure that leads into a new complication. Karma ends when the wheel is integrated, when the Dharma chakra rolls completely. Karma always is there, no matter what the reason, for thinking this is not going to keep me. This should not be. It all is, and the is should roll in one motion. Then, after this, Longfellow brings the end of the song of Hiawatha by a vision of the coming of the white man. And when he sees in his vision that the white man is coming, then he gravely spake and answered to the jeering and their jesting, True is all the opera tells us. I have seen it in a vision, seen the great canoe with pinions, seen the people with white faces, seen the coming of this bearded people of a wooden vessel, from the regions of the morning, from the shining land of water. Gishimanitu, the mighty, the great spirit of creator, sends them hither on his errand. They're coming, not for their greed, not to take our land. They are on an errand also in this great kingdom of existence, coming under the direction of the Great Spirit, and therefore Hiawatha departs westward and sets up, as Longfellow sees in his vision, a cycle that the pioneers will follow, and in the following will, at some time in the future, realize that they went the same way. They overlaid the experience of the red man, and that there was a mystic intertwined purpose of the Great Spirit in this adventure. So Hiawatha's departure, and Longfellow styles it in this way, 2 excerpts. By the shores of Gitchigumi, by the shining big sea water, at the doorway of his wigwam, in the pleasant summer morning, Hiawatha stood and waited. All the air was full of freshness, All the earth was bright and joyous, and before him to the sunshine, westward toward the neighboring forest, past in golden swarm the almond, past the bees, the honeymakers, burning, singing in the sunshine. Bright above him shone the heavens, level spread the lake before him. From its bosom leaped the sturgeon, sparkling, flashing in the sunshine. On its margin the great forest stood reflected in the water. Every treetop had its shadow, motionless beneath the water. In other words, a vision of the unity of nature, its polarities unified. And it was with that vision, that spiritual perception, that Hiawatha leads to move westward. Nothing big, nothing fragmented, nothing about a conflict, but a vision of wholeness in nature. And he begins to set in through his yoke a pioneer path that the red man will take, and later the white man will take over him, so that there is a double helix of motion through American history, which Hiawatha helped initiate by his going. And of course, it is self-development that he stands in, and it takes him. I am going, O my people, on a long and distant journey. Many moons and many weathers will have come and will have vanished, ere I come again to see you. But my guests I leave behind me. Listen to their words of wisdom. Listen to the truth they tell you. For the Master of Light has sent them from the land and light of light and morning. On the shore stood Hiawatha, turned and waved his hand at parting. On the clear and luminous water, he launched his birch canoe for sailing. From the pebbles of the marsh, shoved it forth into the water, whispered to it, westward, westward, and with speed it darted forward. Time. Time is a thief. I don't know how I can get to Greene and Greene. Get to Greene. Longfellow's four friends got together, and five of them made a club. And one of the people was Charles Sumner Greene. That's Charles Sumner, for whom Charles Sumner Greene was named. Sumner was a wonderful musician. He was in Congress for about 25 years. So it's, he was in Congress from 1851 to 1874 when he got his birthday. He was the chairman of Foreign Relations from 1851 to 1861. So that he was very high up in Congress. He was a very close associate, congressional of Lincoln, the Republican. Yes, with his Longfellow. They all believed in the necessity of abolishing slavery, the necessity of putting the country back in the moral train. And Charles Sumner Greene was born in 1868. So he was 14 when Longfellow was young. His brother Henry was born a few years later. He was only due to tremendous metabolic health, and both of them lived to 1950. Henry died in Albany in 1954. And Charles died in Carmel in 1957. They did most of their work, though, creative work, before the First World War, and built very little after the First World War. And were recognized by the American Institute of Architects until they had a big celebration for them in 1952. They woke up to the fact that they had built some most of their private residences, because the house, the home, is a very, very potent symbol for for mankind, particularly for Americans. Home is a very potent symbol. It has encoded in all of its possibilities everything that we really do treasure and really do need to know. And so it is always a revelation to find architects instead of designers, artists instead of construction engineers, and a home. And in the case of Greene and Greene, in one particular instance, it can home perfect. And we can see it anytime we wish. And speaking of the Gamma House, we're in Pasadena, which is about as mystical an expression of the human spirit as you can find. Apart from if you want to go to Gamma House. It has an erring capacity for sensitive to elicit from qualities which, when you get acquainted again here, can only be turned to the person. And it was put not in some arcane cipher document to be buried, but was raised up in sunlight and natural materials to be lived in day after day. And through the great graces and energies that move in our region, it has been preserved almost perfectly, been put into the context of the great religions so that it will be preserved. And we can go and experience it over and over again. The basic motif that occurs in the Gamma House is a motif of this cloud symbol. And you can play with the cloud symbol and go back through vibration, through lightning, through images of man, through images of cloud, naturally the cumulus cloud. From where that symbol or artistic motif may have come from, visionary sense. But this form is used over and over and over in various elements in the system, so that the entire house, in terms of its composition, creates the vibration of cloud-formed motion. And if you've been in there a dozen times, you can come out of that door and not feel like you're walking on the discovery. And you have to go and get yourself in. It's an incredible experience because they designed every aspect of the house. They made the carpets, the rugs, they made the furniture. They made everything that you see and don't see. So that the entirety of the structure began with one up to Europe for a year. They left the mountain and $50,000 to build this thing. And so Greene and Greene got busy with their telegrams and they sent for all the master crafts in Europe. And they brought Tiffany glass experts and brought carpenters that knew how to work with the woods of the world, masons. They brought the whole crew together and they sat down for a year or so and they built. And it was an enormous 8,000 square foot home. And it's 12 rooms just open amply into a visible realm of right proportion. And the golden beam and the cloud symbol are just everywhere in a natural form. And we'll see some thought in that time. It is the counterpart of this expression of the reverence of man, of nature. That's an open book of mystic picture. Because through learning how to write the natural symbol in architecture, Greene and Greene made a true visionary home, which we can occupy. And it is peculiarly an American expression. You won't find it in Japan, and you won't find it in which you find here, is odd because it brings together like harmonious elements from disparate groups that had once been primarily limited before the last message, and now they're brought back together in a new life and gives it that unmistakable flavor of verity. And we'll see some points of that. The mystic picture writing, the making of spiritual songs in a limited array of symbols, is an art which is beginning to become attuned to again. So, John, I have made some slides of some of these from Smithsonian Institute publication on the Grand Medicine Lodge, the Medweevil of Ojibwa. We have some slides, and I'm afraid we have so many slides today, and so many are piled up in brief. Forgive me if I just show them to you and not enlarge too much. We will come back to these poems. The mystic song will bring that next week, because when we talk about William James, who comes out of Harvard, same place, born and grown up there about the same time, we begin to see that these links of great visionaries in this country seem to touch side by side, and we seem to find that there is this great chain of being operating within American history, all of this world, perfect love. And with James, when we talk about the varieties of religious experiences, great classic, we'll have to come back and we'll use some of these old Algonquin Indian songs to show basic patterns which reoccur in religious vision. And James, of course, the great synthesizer on psychological and intellectual level. For those that don't know, Carl used to read William James all the time. So well, let's look at some of them and see them. I hope this is going to work. This is a slide of Lincoln first. This is one of the few smiling Lincolns we've ever been able to discover. Alice, our librarian here, found a cache of engraved images of presidents and writers. And lo and behold, one was a smiling Lincoln. As smiling as he got. Yeah. I forget who it was, but somebody once said that future tyrants are going to have a terrible time trying to use American history and heroes to justify their tyrannies, because when you look back and you see what they represented, you can see it for your own self. It represented dignity, maturity, and integration. And there's no way to get around it. Rail splitter sounds pretty strict. They're not going to entrust these stations to me. Longfellow, 1865, 1870, around there. He would be 60 years old or so after most of his publications. I'm going to rush along. There's so many things I tend to say. These are faces of the Ojibwa Indians in Longfellow's time. These were painted in the 1880s, and they pretty well represent the kind of individuals that we would be in the song parallel. Bark carriers. I don't know if you can see engraved on there, the Thunderbird and a buffalo. abstractly. The ends are frayed and curved in so as to hold the contents, and we carried like a baton in the hand. Here's some other art materials. Right. The elements of the Meadowland ceremony are the recipe for all transformative magic. The drum, the rattle, the tobacco for making inhalation visible, the songs, the movements, and the mysteries. Here's a rattle, looking very much like the Tibetan prayer. Very first. When the Cardiva Lamas visited the Hopi Indians, they hit it right on. The Lamas showed up, and the Hopis asked for rain, and the Lamas did the rain dance, which they could understand. And rain. That happened a few years ago. Similar tradition. Similar wedges of insight. In the Grand Medicine Lodge are posts, and the posts, universally true, often resemble crosses. More often, they were about 7 feet high, often painted red with a green stripe across the top, and a stuffed owl would be posted on top of the structure. And these would be placed in a lodge, the dimensions of which would be roughly 80 feet by 20. And the walls and the roof, of course, would be just the wadded thatched saplings worked in. This kind of construct. In the foreground is a flattened stone, more than a foot in diameter, basically, as a focus for certain ceremonial happenings. The post at the far end, this would be the first degree, or 4 degrees to the Hermetic. And then a blanket in the center for the donation by the initiate of offerings, tobacco for the priests, and various other elements. The east and the west walls would have apertures that would open out. And it was like double doors being flung open and kept open so that the walls would form little short corridors that are off on the east end, about 100 paces away, would be held a sweat lodge. And at the beginning of the ceremony, the initiation, would be 4 days successively in the sweat lodge. And then the initiate on the 5th day would be brought into the ceremony for whatever degree he was receiving. This is from later on, the 4th degree, the 4th post. But you can see the red with the top pretty clearly. One aspect in the ceremony, which is outstanding, is the what they call the shooting of the megas. The megas is a mystic symbol, usually thought to be a shell, very much like a small white shell, rather curved and rounded, having a Lysica type outline. And it would be symbolically shot into the breast of the initiate. This would be, there are the first degree in the Midway, 4 knitting priests, and each one would take a medicine pouch, which had been made to move on the ground by his telepathic power, telekinetic power before him, to show that he did, in fact, have the power charged in him so that he could manipulate at a distance physical objects. Then he would pick up the pouch that had a little white shell in it, and he would make motions as if it were like a gun, and bring it with a loud hey to the breast of the initiate. And each one of the priests would do this, coming closer and closer to the heart of the initiate, so that the initiate was actually a target for mystic death. And after the fourth motion, after the completed cycle of motions at 4, the initiate would fall as if dead, and the little white shell, which had been placed ceremoniously in the mouth beforehand, would come out, would fall out, be made to fall. And then this little shell would be brought back and given to the mouth of the initiate by the head priest. And then they would circumambulate and bring that person back to life, reborn in a reconstructed way. This is a general outline of its motion. That was the first degree. There were 4 degrees, increasingly complex. The song that would be sung for each of the stages of this motion would be noted down in this sort of manner on birch bark. And there are 4 separate songs. I think we've got one. We always get them in backwards. I will try and write them up and bring them. I don't know if you can do this. We can move along a bit faster.
Upside down.
You're not going to trust either of us with the space station. Each element in the song would be a symbolic phrase. We'll work on these and return to order them in next week. I'll bring them in. I have a couple of songs. The celebrant, as they would go through the various stages, would receive face painting, somewhat similar to the painting on the post, so that very often the facial colorings that you see here are not the mark of savagery at all, but the mark of sophisticated religious initiation. And you notice that the polarity, the natural polarities, the green and red, are the most often used colorations. And very often lines, like Brazilian line across the bridge of the nose, which intersects the eyes and runs across to the temples, brings in that one horizon the major sight, smell, hearing, and integration levels with the third eye level. And there are other similarities. And we have a time we'll do a special on this whole element of picture writing and facial painting methods. This is a sketch, a series of sketches, 3 sketches made by a 4th degree medieval priest, who is also a magician known in Algonquin language as a Jessica. And these are mystical paintings and drawings. And if you can see, these are people shapes. Inside this first sketch is like a heart suspended. But it also, when born on the chest, is the symbol of a medieval priest. And the larger this diadem on the chest, on the scapula here, the larger it is, the higher the degree. Of course, it's very huge. Here's the priest, here's the initiate, and this hand, the diadem. Having mystically off in a scattered nexus from this are manitos, spirits. Some of them malevolent, most of them, in fact, malevolent. Some of them, and at the top of Thunderbirds are teaching them the Greek spirit. In the second one, there's confusion of meaning and the dive in has its spoke going on, rather like a sunburst. And there seemed to be a kind of a scattering of energies throughout the spirit realms. Then in the third case, under the teaching, with the initiative being brought closer together, in fact, being in a position to experience through his own transcendent mind, the tree of life is reinstated and brought together, integrated, so that all of the spirit